Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwindt.
I'm Jared Pechaček.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 36th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to have you back with us. It has been, in general, a nice enough February. I won't complain about that. On the quiet personal things, he said understatedly, as opposed to everything else we're about to talk about. How are you guys doing?
I have been involved in like 4 or 5 different group chats about what we're about to talk about. It has consumed everything. My poor husband he'll never tell me he's sick of me talking about it, but he's absolutely sick of me. He was like, we need to get you a hobby. It's like, this is my hobby.
Yeah, I was about to say, what are we, chopped liver? Before we get into things, because yes, there is rather a bit to talk about, we do want to thank everyone who's been sending us all kinds of notes, replies, comments. We're getting a lot more of it lately. It could be because of certain events. Especially like to thank the listener who is on Twitter. What do they go by? Princess Quill out there, basically saying, I'm so exhausted by this discourse already. I can't wait for your next episode to heal me. We are here to provide healing. We hope we are, at least. It may be more, faith healing, but still, we'll figure out a way. And but also thanks to listener Andreas Svensson with nice little suggestions and praise and other things we've been getting to. We really appreciate it. We really do. It's nice to have that feedback. Please send us more as you choose. And we could, of course, go on about other things. But yeah, a lot to talk about. I think there just might be news this month. So, Jared, please, as always, do take it away.
Yeah, Amazon has opened the floodgates. We have content and then some, but only so much. Still a lot more than we had before. Following the title reveal video, Amazon first shared out a variety of character posters, initially without any identification, and then the first teaser trailer debuted as part of the orgy of Super Bowl commercial content, along with online events and other stuff that makes 21st century PR first what they are. Meantime, no less than 3 separate stories in Vanity Fair showcased what they're exactly willing to tell us about the stories so far, or the series so far, rather, which again is more than we had before, but still leaves a lot pretty unclear, if not downright confusing at points. Oh my god. And to top it all off, Warner Brothers separately announced more details about its anime adaptation, The War of Rohirrim, which is, again, specifically in continuity with the Jackson adaptations, as can be seen with some initial production art. But there's yet another factor going on, the rumor that the Saul Zaentz company is interested in selling its rights to The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings for $2 billion at least. Where exactly this all is going to end up, nobody knows yet.
So I know we want to talk about the trailer, but since we're on the rights thing, this is so insane to me. It's actually, It's more insane than I thought it was, because in one of those Vanity Fair pieces that came out around the trailer, the showrunners of the Amazon Lord of the Rings series said specifically that they have the rights to the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, the Return of the King, and the appendices, which is also what the Saul Zaentz company wants to sell, but it's because there was a specific carve-out in the rights for a television series, and the Saul Zaentz company does not have those, and that's why Amazon was able to do what it is currently doing. That's baffling. That's totally insane to me.
What is it? It's basically what they have the rights for means that the series is essentially their fanfic, extrapolating from the appendices, because they can't use the Silmarillion still. So it's just an AO3 entry with cameras and a budget.
But with a large budget, admittedly.
A really large budget. A budget larger than some countries have.
Yeah, $460-something million just for one season, I think. Anyway, that's the rights situation that is absolutely insane. You like to think of copyright as kind of a relatively simple thing. Either you have the rights to a work or not. But no, it's infinitely more complex and silly.
I still have to wonder if this somehow explains, maybe indirectly, finally explains how the Rankin Bass stuff was able to get made, because that was designed for TV, but it's not a series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Technicalities.
Maybe some people were just kind of asleep at the wheel when that was going on. I think that might be maybe just general incompetence. Like...
That's the 70s, and
right?
that's
They were all coked out,
I think we made that joke last year too. Yes,
it's a chestnut, but it's a
perennial.
Yeah.
Well, I do have some further thoughts on the rights, not quite conspiracy theory level theories, but maybe halfway close to that. We'll come back to that. But yeah, let's talk about the big thing everyone saw. I mean, we now have a trailer. We now know who a lot of the actors are playing. We now know a lot more. And let's get this out of the way right now, because there are jerks, idiots, and phoebes out there. There are a lot of racists.
Oh,
and
sure.
they suck.
Boo.
Let's just make this absolutely clear, okay? We understand that there's a lot of reaction, or has been a lot of reaction, to the casting, which was already known. It should be noted. These people were cast sometime beforehand. We knew they'd be playing some sort of roles, and this is not really a surprise if you've been following on that level. But okay, fair, fine. You only just learned about it. If your initial reaction was to see people like Sofia Nomvete as the Dwarf Princess Disa, or Izmir Cruz-Cordova as Arondir the Elf, and be like, not white, what? And, think of that as a problem. The problem is you.
Yes.
let's make this absolutely freaking clear. The problem is you.
We think you need an attitude adjustment. We're happy to have you if you can just be cool and stop being racist. If you want to stop being racist and enjoy, and join us in a conversation about the merits of an adaptation, cool. If not, get out of here. We don't want to hear it.
Yeah, it's so weird how, I shouldn't be surprised. I know I shouldn't be surprised. I should not be surprised at all.
Sure.
But the people who apparently probably don't consider themselves racist, but are trying to keep Lord of the Rings as a whites only club is why? What do you get out of that?
Right.
Why is that a hill that you want to die on?
Right. Especially because the story itself is still a white story.
Yeah.
This is plastic representation, and I am all for this kind of plastic representation. I think that's totally fine. But it is the story underneath was written by a white guy, who had all sorts of baggage from the way he grew up and the myths that he gravitated towards. But, it's still cool. I'm actually super interested to see Disa, the Dwarven princess. I'm genuinely intrigued to see what they're going to do with that. I think it could be cool.
Yeah. That one shot of her in the trailer where she's apparently singing is that's gorgeous. I can't wait to see what she's up to.
Yeah.
I don't want to be part of the hype train here.
No,
I super don't want to be. But there are things in the trailer that I'm excited about.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things I'm not. But
Right.
Well, we can get into that if we choose. Among other things, it should be noted that Jared was our trailer whisperer here, and that when the first dropped, he had figured out certain things that we were assuming one thing. Jared's I bet it's this, and Jared was right. Such as, for instance, the opening shot. A lot of people went, "Oh, Lyndon," and Jared's like, "Beards on those representations of people? Probably men." And it turns out to be Numenor. Yeah. That is the Meneltarm in the background. My problem with that being the Meneltarm is that's a little too snow covered. But, that's just a minor detail.
I enjoy fixating on very, very tiny things.
Things.
We seem to think that Galadriel's, the little sigil that she has, it looks Feanorian. And which feels, but maybe that's just a design thing that they are.
All I can tell you is that Galadriel sure looked like she was winning big time there on the horse in the trailer.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the thing with the star is the Feanorian star is that if it's not supposed to be that, why are they being so slipshod with their design as to include what looks like a Feanorian star on somebody who has no reason to wear one?
Yeah, in fact, has every reason not to.
It. Yeah. Sure, she's buds with Celebrimbor and all that, but I don't think she would carry the badge.
Yeah, that feels like it was something, only after centuries of healing between them. Like, Celebrimbor would have to really make an effort to...
Maybe they're at that. Maybe that's what the costume is saying, is they've gotten to that point. Now she's fine.
When she's wearing it, though, it looks as though she is in the, and I'm going to mispronounce it, sorry everyone, the Helcarax.
The Helcarax.
Yeah. It looks like that's what she's doing.
Yeah.
Like, it looks like she's crossing the bad ice. Like...
Well, that's another thing. So what they've done, according to Vanity Fair and everything, is they've compressed whatever the timeline, whatever it is, has now been compressed. But we don't know what that means yet.
Nope.
No.
So we don't know like what part of Numenor history is being excised or compressed. We don't know anything about that. So what is she? She's Galadriel's the commander of the Northern Alliance, Northern Armies or something. Which is I don't know what that means.
What Northern Armies? What are we talking about?
The North. Nothing was happening in the North. I think.
Right?
Oh no! Wait. So no, that would have been. It's too early for the Witch King. So
Witch King is post Last Alliance. Witch King is a Third Age thing.
Yeah. So what is she? What is this? What's the ice for? What is she doing?
There's lots going on. I mean, here's the thing. Here's been my sort of sticking point with all this. And again, we should note, this is something we're not really drawing from the trailer. This is something that the 3 stories at Vanity Fair, which I'm grateful for the information.
Sure.
But this could be a combination of the fact that it's not, say, the showrunners writing it themselves. Maybe something is a little unclear along the way. Or maybe the fact that everything was sort of doled out in these 3 sort of like, oh, here's another story. Oh, wait, here's another story with more details. You're trying to square everything and squash them all together. And the thing is, it's still intensely unclear, based on some of the language that's being used to describe some of the characters and some of the situations, whether we have everything happening all in a heap, or, as seems to be the case, maybe the initial episode is kind of a prelude episode that sets everything up for everything that follows later, and that's when they can introduce key human characters if everything's happening all in the end there. We're not getting a sense of a series of split timelines. We're not getting a sense of what they tried to do with, say, for instance, The Witcher in its first season, where there were essentially 3 separate things going on at once. This is at different sort of time frames. This is all apparently supposed to be flowing a little more directly and thoroughly at some point. But, it's just, it's a little frustrating. It's a little hard to get your head around. I'll flip it around by pointing out, saying that, yes, this is exactly what a trailer and all the attendance things should be doing, making you wonder what the heck is going on.
At the same time, though, as a piece of marketing, this trailer gives me nothing to really hold on to.
Yeah.
It does not tell me what the story is. And that's like kind of a critical error, I think. We went back and looked at, we all, like in our little chat on Slack, looked at the first trailer for Fellowship of the Ring, but then I went back and watched even just like the teaser trailer for the trilogy as a whole, for the Peter Jackson trilogy, and that movie that teaser trailer tells us what we're in for. It tells us like there's a ring, it's bad, people have different ideas about what to do about it, and that's what we're gonna talk about for 9 hours. Whereas this teaser trailer does not, for the Amazon series, does not tell us diddly squat about what the story is and who these people are and why we should care. And that's kind of a misstep for me in terms of just marketing,
Yeah. I know a lot of people get mad at trailers for like spoiling stuff, which is totally fair. But like the Fellowship of the Ring trailer and so forth don't spoil anything. They're just like, here's the premise.
Yeah.
Here's why you should be excited about this premise. What happens after that point is why you should see the movie. But this is just like a collage with some kind of standard trailer music.
Yeah.
What they're trying to do, though, and they're very open about this, of course, in the trailer, given the captions that flash up, is basically saying, hey, the Lord of the Rings, remember all that? Here's some more. And it is only a minute-long trailer, and they're only wanting to do that much. And it's important to remember that this is not even a movie trailer. This was designed as a commercial for the Super Bowl that ran a minute.
I think that's all the more reason, though, to, like, you know, you have 112 million people watching. You need to tell them what this is. You cannot simply say, hey, look, it's more Lord of the Rings, because most people are like, but we did Lord of the Rings. What more is there to tell? They defeated the bad guy. Why should
you watch a prequel?
Yeah, why do I care about how he got the ring? Like, that doesn't seem all that interesting. Like,
it feels like it was made not for a potential audience, but for the built-in audience. But I mean, it doesn't even necessarily work then, because I'm the built-in audience and I was annoyed by half of the trailer. So
yeah,
but
I think part of it too, and this is something that again the article is bringing up, is that we're getting some odd vibes. Might be the best way to put it. A good example might be the characterization of Elrond as being described.
Yeah.
This is a little weird because basically everything about it that we've gotten so far is that, one, it's supposed to be young Elrond. Well, let's back up here. Let's say you've only read the books and seen the core books and seen the movies and don't know, say, the Silmarillion stuff and all that. So a little extra detail for those out there who might not know, might want to know. So Elrond and his twin brother Elros are the kids of Eärendil, who, you know, literally the star in the sky, Venus in our world, if you like. Key figure at the end of the First Age, signaling the defeat of Morgoth, and literally at the changeover into the First and Second Age, essentially, the Valar, who we'll be getting to, give Elrond and Elros the option, because of their blended backgrounds, both elf and human. Do you want to be of the kindred of the elves or of men? Elrond chooses to be of the elves. His brother Elros chooses to be of men. They literally part forevermore. And Elros is the founder, the first king of Numenor, the island kingdom, which is a key thing. So in other words, we're talking about somebody who is not just simply an elf guy. He's a key person in essentially this whole myth, is fairly well known by default, etc. And the wording in the articles is making it sound like he is a up-and-coming architect real estate guy in the Elven Kingdom of Lindon going, hey, time to make my move to get on the city council. Surely there's more to it than that.
They're just making him like Becky Sharp or something. Yeah. Like he's just a social climber. It's based on the article. You know, we have that to go on, and that's
based on the articles.
And that's like a big critique I have of not just that article, but the way in which people are talking about the Lord of the Rings series in general is, it feels as though we are no longer capable of writing about fantasy series, books, etc., except in the same way that we wrote and talked about Game of Thrones.
Right. Right.
And because you can see, like, the character descriptions in the Vanity Fair article are extremely Game of Thronesy. And it also feels as though, like, that's the language used to pitch this series to an executive, because they simply can't understand Elrond, this recently orphaned elf guy who, you know, just suffered not just the loss of both his parents to the sky, but also his twin brother. You know, they were cared for by the very people who were pursuing their dad, because he had this Silmaril in his possession. There's a lot of like family drama and trauma there, and it feels very strange. But that's like, you need a lot of backstory to talk about that. So instead, they're like, he's a canny young architect and politician. And it's like, what politics are we talking about? What are we talking about?
What are the internal conflicts driving Lindon or whatever? What?
Yeah, we don't know. And that's not Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is not political in a sense that people are jockeying for power within a specific nation or land. I don't know.
Well, to be fair, I think we see it among men. We see it in the history of Numenor.
Yeah.
But we see it in Numenor, not in Lindon, is what
exactly.
we see. Yeah.
The elves are not as political as... They do not do politics in the way we think of politics, and the way in which, like, Game of Thrones, people connected with that, like, sort of social climbing politics, like, you know, ladder climbing. Chaos is a ladder. That's not a Lord of the Rings thing.
It's not an elf thing, for sure. And I think that, I mean, to do that would require you to imagine how an inhuman species manages its governmental affairs in a way that I'm not sure this series is prepared to do. Like, what are politics when you're all immortal?
Right.
What do you have to fight over? What do you fight? Like, why would you be fighting over this? What influence is there to jockey for? Like, all of this kind of thing that it sounds like they're kind of just maybe pushing aside because we need the palace intrigue or something. I don't know.
Or we need to describe it as such so that people, because we still don't know what the show is.
I mean, the thing I would argue, on the one hand, completely agreeing with you guys, I'd argue there is something that can be teased out, which is, I think, what the showrunners, everyone are aiming for, is the fact that basically whenever Sauron does finally show up and is like, hey, and is trying to be the ultimate glad-hander, most everyone goes like, except for a certain key bunch, Celebrimbor, and things happen from there. So the idea that there could be some sort of like potential, rifts and all that are not completely out of place, but framing it as such out of the gate in a weirdly disconnected way, I agree.
Framing that as politics instead of interpersonal conflict is very weird to me.
Fair. Yeah. And then the other thing, I mean, there are many other things. We could go on.
So
I will say
things.
the side thing that I'm whatever else, the hinted at romance between an elf and a human, which, interestingly enough, it changes the genders. So, and they are aware of something that we talked about way back in episode 2 about the conversation between Finrod and Andreth about the possibilities of a human woman falling in love with an immortal male elf. So that's exactly what we're going to be getting a hint of. And I will just say right from the top here, and again, thumb in the eye to anybody who says otherwise, given the backgrounds of the characters, Ismael Cruz Cordova and Nazanin Boniadi as a couple together, hot, smart, extremely good casting. Well done. So, bring that on. So it's Arondir and Bronwyn. There you go. Come up with the ship names right there because you squish it together. So
I feel like the problem with the representation in this show is that they're all hot. Where's my Uggo/normie representation in Middle Earth?
Give time. We haven't seen anyone yet. Here is. Oh, there is so much to talk about this episode. Here is another thing about some of the stuff that we've been getting in the articles and the hints of that. So if you see the trailer, you can see there's this flaming fireball that comes over at one point. And it turns out that it lands near where the Harfoots are. And the Harfoots are meant to be the proto-hobbits. Fair. There are the three kindreds, the Harfoots, the Stewards, and the Fallowhides, who eventually become the Shire Hobbits as we know them. And so the idea is that this is apparently delivering a strange man, it is said, a strange hairy man who befriends two of the Harfoots, one of whom has the last name of Brandyfoot, which, come on, guys.
That's not how this works. That's not how this works.
And, and the first name is Eleanor, like a certain other Eleanor, but the nickname is Nori. So basically I've been making seaweed and sushi jokes. So, here we go. Same spelling even. But the point is that the way it's all being set up is the showrunners are being very cagey, and they know exactly what they're responding to customers, because the idea is that at this point in Middle-earth history, the wizards themselves are not around. So they're like going, we can do a thing and all that. So now it's questions like, okay, is this a buddy of Gandalf's coming early to check things out? Is this Sauron coming in? Is there going to be like a thing about Sauron reappears? The first thing he encounters are the hobbits. There's a lot going on, and my brain is mulch. So
that feels like that's directly contradicted by the text, right? Like,
if it is,
there's that whole Gandalf thing where he says, heretofore the enemy has never heard
known
of
about
hobbits.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe if that's the direction they're going, I mean, you could argue maybe Gandalf just doesn't know.
I guess.
That Sauron account. But why would he not know that?
But why would he at the same time? Who knows? Yeah.
My bet is that what they are doing here is this is actually Gandalf. It's just pre-actual being Gandalf, and he's visiting Middle-earth or something, and he meets the hobbits, and they're explaining why he's so fond of them, and it's going to be really cheesy and horrible. That's what I think is going on. Is that it's Olorin on a trip to Middle-earth.
On my face.
I don't want it to be that, but I think that's what it is. He's like, oh, hobbits were kind to me when I fell from the sky, and that's where they're my favorite. And it's like,
oh, by the way, that's how wizards come over. They fall from the sky.
They don't just arrive on a ship.
Like they flamingly appear, poof, which could go other directions.
I did want to I don't know if anybody else had anything I wanted to say here, but a brief thing that kind of bothers me about the marketing so far, it's not the marketing exactly, it's what we know of the show, is that they are kind of erasing the weird gender stuff that happens with elves and dwarves. Like Disa, as a lot of people have already pointed out, doesn't have a beard and doesn't she looks pretty distinct from a dwarf man. And think like cases like Elrond having short hair, like both elves and dwarves are not really that sexually dimorphic. So the show is it's forcing them into this sort of
binary
that doesn't quite exist. I mean, it is there in the text. I'm not going to argue that, but they present differently. So it's, I don't know if it doesn't sink it for me, but I think it's a little odd that in some ways it's less progressive. It's more regressive, I guess, than the 2001 movie.
That is kind of weird.
It is a little bit weird, and I don't know what's up with that, but it is a little strange.
To see.
It is weird. That note from our listener sort of guided us towards this Wikipedia article about this tribe in
the Lingobards.
Where the women went into battle disguised with
their hair tied around face,
so it looked
I thought that was really interesting, but I also, even if dwarf women don't have beards, I think they should look a lot more like what we think of as men. So nothing against Disa, who again from she looks great.
She looks amazing, but
she looks great. But the showrunner's decision to do things this way. And again, everything we're talking about is based on like 1 minute of screen time and some promotional stills.
And us going crazy in discussion.
Just hopping, man.
But like, why doesn't Elrond have long hair? Like,
he hadn't grown it out yet. Maybe he got a buzz cut.
Yeah, well, how long? I bet actually in the nature of Middle Earth somewhere there is an equation that dictates how long it takes for elven hair to grow.
Maybe he cut it short after his parents disappeared. It's an act of mourning and it hasn't grown out yet. I don't know. There could be any number of actual reasons for it. That would be cool if that was it, but you know.
Before we switch over to briefly at least talk about the War of the Rohirrim, we will want to point out that there is some interesting continuity news that we've definitely gotten about the new Amazon series. Some of this was rumored, but it's now finally confirmed. We already knew that John Howe was involved on design. Again, Alan Lee has not been involved, but we're going to at least have that much continuity, and somebody who's obviously very well known for the artwork. But they have confirmed that Kate Hawley, who was the costume designer for the Hobbit films, I forgot her last name, who did them for the original
Nyla Dixon.
Thank you. Who did them for the Lord of the Rings? So it's Kate Hawley, who did a perfectly fine job in The Hobbit, I thought. So she's continuing with costumes in this, and confirmation after rumors, Howard Shore is doing the music. Yay! I think if nothing else, the show will ultimately look fairly like what we've seen on a certain level. There are certain people that unfortunately couldn't have continued. It would have been amazing if Andrew Leslie, say, had done the cinematography, but alas, he has passed on. So there is that. So we'll have to see about that. Now, interestingly, of course, John Howe is involved in this certain other production, War of the Rohirrim, the anime, which we now have the first still for. So, that must be an interesting assignment, doing both those. And that one, of course, we know comparatively very little of, except that we've gotten now a couple of stills, which interestingly enough, shows the Mumox, shows the Haradrim are apparently around and involved in the Civil War that's described in the appendices, those darned appendices, and all that. That's something that has led to questions. There was a piece on One Ring Net the other day going about explaining, well, here's why they could be there. But the scenarios described in the appendices does clearly indicate that it's not simply a civil war. It is a thing where there's also attacks on Gondor and other things going on.
They're having a real 2021 of a time there, so...
I have made the argument that regardless of else, it's one of those things that even if it doesn't necessarily fit continuity, it looks cool, and maybe that's all that we need. So we will have to see. And that one, that combined with the whole rights issue and other things, we know even less about that now. So there's still something going on, although allegedly we are supposed to be getting a voice cast announced sometime soon. So we'll see.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so there's
that. I can't remember. I know this came up, and I should have looked it up, but I just realized just now that I didn't know the answer. Is the War of the Rohirrim movie 2D animation, or are they doing 3D?
I do not know. That is a good question. I have not heard an answer to that. So, don't know yet.
Well, Something to research, I suppose.
Based on the work that the director, I'm very, very annoyed that his name has slipped past me, that he did for Star Wars Visions, I believe it's 2D. So I want to say that, but I could be wrong. I should go back and double check that. So it was a very good entry in that whole sequence of stuff that came out last year. Highly recommended. I'm going to leave you guys with one thing so we can actually talk about their main topic, but I'm going to throw this at you. So this whole rights thing and everything like that and what they're doing. Here's my conspiracy theory, which is probably not true, but imagine if. So no, they obviously aren't doing Lord of the Rings. But if you were thinking long term here, this TV show is supposed to run for 5 years. That's the plan. 5 seasons is what they've said. They're already, pretty heavily committing to that. We'll see, of course, if this comes off, as anyone who followed, Lost or Battlestar Galactica reboot or anything can tell you, dreams and plans don't always play out. So, and there are many other examples. If you were Jeff Bezos, among other things, and you were really had some sort of weird long-term plan for this, what better way to eventually build up over time using the TV show thing as a loophole to get around to remaking Lord of the Rings way the hell down the road years and years later by starting here. I'm just throwing that out there.
Curse us with that.
Rude.
And let me point out, too, this is where, again, it comes back to that whole rights thing. Keep in mind, the big rights revelation that we got from that story when the showrunner said it was stuff from those books made to realize something that we had, I think everybody, from what we could tell, had completely wrong, or at least, a lot of people, certainly I did. My guess this whole time was that the original $250 million deal that the estate did with Amazon way the heck back then was essentially, because they didn't give in any crazy detail about it, was essentially something that they said, the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings is elsewhere. Here's everything else.
Yeah.
And you can do stuff with everything else.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
Nope.
Interestingly, they're sticking with the Christopher Tolkien plan. They're not letting any of the other rights go.
Wild.
Crazy. So if they're still holding on to those rights and they're not doing anything with them and they're still able to get them out of money out of Amazon, in which case, good job. So,
yeah, bleed them dry.
Sure.
Fantastic. So that is interesting because, it's all of a sudden, instead of it being this theoretically expensive scope that Bezos and everyone can play around with, all of a sudden it's just back to this little carve out of rights for those, admittedly, obviously, key books that they can't do anything more with. It's weirdly fascinating. It really is. Because, where else can this show go?
Yeah. My little brain just can't take it. It's so weird. Like, I've been operating under the assumption that we're going to get this rich history of Numenor. We're going to get the Mariner's Tale. We're going to get Aldarion and Erendis and Calumet and like all the great domestic drama that you can get, where I guess, you get your little palace intrigue there, Nope. They don't have the rights to it.
No,
what do you do? I guess that's why you compress the timeline, because you literally don't have access to the one more or less complete story that sets up the actual fall of Numenor.
Maybe that's why they're making Isildur just like some random sailor or whatever it is.
Some guy. He's some guy is a sailor? Isildur?
The only thing I can think is that he's just gone to sea. He's still like the Isildur we know and love, but for some reason he's a sailor right now, and that's it. He ran away from home. I don't know. He joined the Navy. He did anything.
He's just, I guess, there's no real, they're the Lords of Andunier or whatever, but what does that even mean in practice? Like, they just kind of hang out there.
Well, they sort of become the focus of resistance, you could say, to, the thing. So there is, again, intrigue, there is something to be had there. But if this makes us all sound like we're down on everything, we're not completely down on it. We just sort of like, we need more, and we're not going to get it for a few more months. And I assume that Amazon has now given us the taste. We're not going to get anything more for a while. And it should be noted that there are, I believe, 8 of those character posters have still not had identified actors placed with them. We still don't know everyone who's apparently key in this season, at least. And the one other thing to throw out there is that apparently this season is, in fact, meant to be a prelude setting up the big conflict, which is interesting in its own right. So
that feels very much of a piece with this insistence that I absolutely hate of people treating TV as just a long movie Boy, do I hate that.
Just have freaking episodes, people. I mean,
we love episodes. There's a reason people just put Law and Order on and shit. Like, you don't need, Law and Order Middle Earth or anything, but
but imagine if.
But like
Dwarf Hammer for the two tones.
Oh my god.
Even something like Battlestar Galactica or I don't know, freaking Deep Space Nine with long form stories. Did those within the context of episodic television.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So it can be done, and people love Deep Space Nine, and some people love Battlestar Galactica.
And Babylon 5, of course, another good example.
Yeah.
Oh, I always forget about Babylon 5. That's right,
rebooting.
Yeah, which Straczynski himself is rebooting, and seems to be doing so. And that's the thing. Straczynski famously had an extremely hyper-focused role, wrote most of the episodes, and yet, always allowed for good episodic moments along the way. It's a not so secret strength of that series. So we are where we are. We the 90s were the decades of things like Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5, etc. We are now in the world of The Expanse and Breaking Bad and everything else like that. So things have changed. Wow, that was a lot. And there's still an episode to talk about here. So
yeah.
We need to get on to that.
I get the feeling this will just be like the Valar Part 1, really,
Oh, yeah.
Valar intro. So, well, that being the case, we start giving it away. We need to get into it. And it was Jared's choice of topic. Lead the discussion. The floor is yours.
Yeah, the Valar. Webster's dictionary defines Valar. This is, like we were saying, this is a huge topic. Like, it's so huge that, honestly, I really struggled to introduce it, because they're so foundational to the entire Legendarium, more so than even things like, more famous elements of it, like Hobbits or The Ring or whatever. And they do so much, or sometimes do so little, that all their actions or inactions just reverberate from one end of the Legendarium to the other. And yet, after a certain point, they're mostly just kind of like, like divine background radiation. It's like saying, let's talk about Middle-earth. Like, how do you boil that down into a thesis statement? It's a whole continent of lore here. So I'm just going to quickly sum up what they are. The Valar are often referred to in text as the gods, but they're more like incarnate-ish angels or demiurges. In the cosmology of Arda, Eru the One is, capital G God, and he's accompanied by the Ainur, who are essentially angels. At the beginning of time, the Ainur perform music conceived of by Eru, and he uses that music as the blueprint of the world and asks for volunteers from the Ainur to go down to creation and help create it. The Ainur who do this become known as the Valar, or Powers. The greatest of them become known as the Valar. They've got a bunch of attendants, which we can get into, or not. Unlike the Genesis narrative, which he's clearly drawing from in some respects, but whatever. In Tolkien's world, the universe is built by the Valar, following the will of God, like literally constructed by them. He just kind of gives them the go-ahead. And they have a fair bit of freedom to invent and create within those strictures, and this is therefore a sub-creative act, and we know how much he loved some sub-creation. So, another thing we can get into. And the Valar, unlike the other Ainur, are also bound to the realm of Arda. Until it ends, they can't leave it, and except for Manwë, can't really even communicate outside of it. There are 14 Valar, accompanied by an unknown number of subordinate spirits called Maiar. Sauron is a very famous Maya, and the various wizards are also Maiar. There is also a sort of disgraced 15th, the Satan of this universe, whom you might have heard of, some guy called Melkor or Morgoth. He could be his own episode. For real, I don't necessarily want to talk about him too much here, but he's there. Each of the Valar represents and rules an aspect of nature, but there isn't a really direct mapping onto elemental forces all the time. Like, Manwë is the Vala of air and sky and birds and eagles and things. Varda is the Vala of light and the stars. Ulmo is the sea, and so on. But there are also people like Lorien, who's the master of dreams, and Nienna, who is very sad. And there's Tulkas, the god of himbos. I love Tulkas. Now, as to what they do or do not, that's another thing to get into, because the Valar are problematic faves, to say the least. Nearly everything wrong with Arda is directly attributable to their decisions, so much so that the Index of the Nature of Middle-earth book has a subheading for their, quote, errors, which says a lot all by itself. This is such a big issue that as early as the 60s, fans without access to the Silmarillion were conjecturing just how badly the Valar had screwed up based on nothing but the information in the appendices of Return of the King. And to be honest, they got pretty close sometimes. The evidence for their misdeeds or whatever is so clear. Anyway, but I called them problematic faves, and so I'm going to throw a softball question first before we really get into it. Who's your favorite? Who's your favorite of the Valar?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I love sad girl Nienna.
Yes, same. I was pretty flip about her in the intro, but I genuinely find her so fascinating.
Well, and her role, she is, she is akin to Lorien, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
she's the sister of Mandos and Lorien.
And I think it's a fun little trio that he set up there of death, rest, and sadness as like these kind of three essential life occurrences.
Yeah. Well, she's the Lady of Mercy.
Yeah.
And she also in some ways functions as a wisdom goddess. Like one of the reasons Gandalf is so wise is that he hung out with her a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little more going on than just she's crying all the time, but also she is crying all the time.
This is relatable.
I love her so much.
Who could argue? As for me, that's a good one. I'm probably going to be incredibly obvious here, but my two choices are the Archgoth himself, Mandos, because
yes.
the ultimate in cutting comments, not the first.
Yeah,
if you read the Silmarillion, you know what I'm talking about. And then you can argue that Morgoth is the ultimate Archgoth. No, he's another thing entirely. Mandos is the Archgoth. Ulmo is probably my other favorite, simply because he does have sort of a role, but it's sort of stronger role, you could say, in the working things out. But also because you could say I identify with his sense of frustration that you give people clear instructions and they're not followed. But as anyone who's ever dealt with me in my past years as a library worker, and you see Irvine, I was trying to explain bills to people. That's another story. But more seriously, I like the idea of someone who understands the letter of the law and is trying to sort of work things out around it, because he's like, there's still got to be room for something. Thus his amazing conversation with Tuor, who may be just a guy.
But that conversation,
exactly. But Olmo does have his things that he needs to explain to him, and that is, of course, a very key scene in the entire Legendarium from almost the first years of its creation up until all the way down the way. But yeah, those would be my two.
Yeah, that actually, bringing up Ulmo gets into something that I really, really want to talk about. And the Valar are not on trial here.
Aren't they, though? Aren't they?
By implication.
This is not a binding... The resolutions of this court have no... for one thing, they provide a way for... This is secondary to what I actually want to get into, but I want to come back to this later. They provide a way for God to not make mistakes, because his subordinates are the ones making all the mistakes. It's because they just don't understand what he wants.
It's bad management.
That is so interesting, especially coming from a Catholic author. But that's kind of feeds into what Ulmo is doing, which he kind of understands what Eru wants more than some others do. But he's not able to influence the other Valar in these mistakes that they keep making. They make the same mistakes so often. Specifically what I'm thinking of is the way that they have a tendency to isolate. So, they build Valinor, they wall themselves off, they just hang out there and wait for the elves to awaken. And meanwhile, Morgoth is just out in Middle-earth, just, breeding monsters. And, Orome leaves Valinor, the hunter god, and slays them now and again. But that's it. They don't do anything. And it is understandable to me that they are doing this, because most of the creation process of Arda involves them fixing Melkor's mistakes and fighting him, and they're just exhausted. They want a break. I get that. I really get that. Anyway, so then the elves awaken, and the Valar are like, well, Morgoth's still causing trouble. We've got to deal with him. So they imprison him and then bring the elves, I think is the order of events here. They bring the elves over to Valinor. Not all the elves go, but the Valar's impulse is to be like, let's keep these guys safe, because they're so fragile and delicate, and we need them in the soft play area. So they pull them back to Valinor, which causes a whole bunch of other problems, the flight of the Noldor, the Silmarils, all of that, which is not directly attributable to their decisions in some ways, because they didn't make them do any of this, but they let it happen. And then later on, after Morgoth is finally defeated, and they decide to reward the good men with Numenor. So once again, they're pulling whatever influence for good there might be out of Middle-earth to give it its own place. which I think is explicitly stated in a couple, probably the nature of Middle-earth. This is not what Eru wants. He wants the elves to be in Middle-earth. He wants them to hang out and fix things and just be an influence for good in this dark place. But the Valar are like, oh, but we gotta protect them. They're doing this like an overzealous babysitter kind of thing. Like, let's keep you inside so your dad doesn't ask why your knee is scraped when he gets home. And they do, and despite it turning out badly every single time. I just said what I had to say about that, but like, what do you guys see as their mistakes? What are their, people get mad at them a lot. What are you mad at them for?
Well, you see, it's funny you're phrasing it that way, because what I'm doing now is sort of taking it back to the beginning, when there was the one, and it's the question almost of setting up these characters at the start and what they were seen to be doing. What we get from the music of the Ainur at the beginning is the sense essentially only of one core conflict. It could be said that everyone's singing along. Melkor gets the idea that he'd like to do his own riffs and improv jams, and basically just keeps repeating the same notes over and over again, whereas everyone else creates these multi-level Charles Ives complicated symphonies or whatever, and things like that. So and it becomes more elaborate, more beautiful, and then at a certain point, Eru calls time and says, "Hey, look what you guys did." So what's interesting there is that seemingly without any direction, the spirits who become the Valar have created this wonderful thing out of this distortion, out of this the problem that Melkor has introduced, and it's good. There's no pain involved. It's all this creative act, or maybe the pain of creation, you could say, horror. But this there's nothing really. There's no suffering. But as soon as it becomes incarnate, and as soon as you get down, and there is a world globed within the universe, globed within the encircling void, and you get down there, things start hurting. Not people yet. The people aren't there yet, but Arda is quickly marred thanks to Melkor coming in, going like, "Hey," and trying to just keep up with what he's doing. So it's sort of like what the Valar act initially, or the Ainur really initially, is acting in this realm of abstraction, and then as it becomes concrete, all of a sudden the stakes get higher. And what's interesting is that Eru's attitude towards them all seems to be essentially the same before and after. Like, oh, it's like this. And it was the first time it's more like, okay, you were following along. That's fantastic. When it gets down to the world there and they're running off on their own, the Valar in their own soft play area, it's just defined by that. It's sort of like whenever you get the question, and there are those couple of amazingly crazy moments in the best way in the nature of Middle-earth. Very glad the book came out, where it's sort of like, Manwë talking to Eru, and he was sort of like, almost the equivalent of, "Geez, I got to spoon feed you people."
Yeah, you figure it out. You figure it out.
And it's like, and it's sort of like you almost get a sense of Eru going like, "I told you once, and you did this already. Why are you asking me again?" Which says something about Eru. But that, it's this weird sort of thing. Ultimately, the Valar are not all seeing and all knowing. They're close, but they're more like they take in the information, but they don't know how to interpret it.
It's kind of like they saw the vision of Arda without glasses on. So like they just don't have enough of the detail that they need to actually execute. We've all worked for a boss who like wasn't clear enough in the brief about what they actually wanted, and then you do this thing and the boss is like, No. Now, oh God, now you've really done it. Like, now there's so much more work to be done. Okay. And then you get scared to do anything. And so you just kind of take a back seat and things go even more poorly. So it is pretty relatable, I have to say.
The whole subcreation thing, I think, comes into play here, where he's giving them the freedom to act, but also kind of withholding approval.
Yeah. Look at him getting off.
He's not giving them feedback.
Right.
There's no quarterly reviews or anything. They're just left to do this.
And then people start dying and they're like, excuse me. Oh God, what are we supposed to, they're not supposed to die.
Yeah.
Oh God, what do we do? Their spirits are just hanging out here.
Kind of building a house? I don't know what's going on. So yeah, I mean, it's almost in a way set up for them to fail.
Yeah, and then you have them doing I think all the time. I think a lot about Aule creating the dwarves because he just couldn't wait, which is wild. That's wild to me. But he goes and creates them, and then it's like, oh, okay, just kidding. Sorry, I'll destroy them. And God is like, yeah, all right, they can be real. It's okay. Look, they shrunk back from your hammer. I already did it. I already made them alive. But then
their first reaction is fear. Great.
Yeah, surely that had no repercussions for the rest of that species history. But so that now all of a sudden there's just new stuff in Middle Earth. There's new people in Middle Earth, and they are, for whatever reason, just directly opposed to Aule's wife's creation, the trees.
I love that whole chapter.
I love it so much. It's so I love getting those glimpses of the powers of the world having a marital spat.
Yeah, exactly.
Nevertheless, they'll have need.
Yes. Nevertheless, they will have need of. Oh, it's so good.
What a killer last line! Like, how did he say it? Did he just directly sass it back? Did he mutter it under his breath? I want to know.
Yeah, I do. I think it is significant that unlike Melkor and Sauron are obviously always making mistakes on some ethical mistakes, but when the Valar make mistakes, they are mistakes driven by love and care. Mm-hmm. Because all of the things that they he says it a few times in I think it's the nature of Middle Earth, but it does come up in the Silmarillion at least once. They love elves and men. They think we are so cool because they had nothing to do with our making. They're just like this wonderful thing that Eru has made, and we are similar to them in that we have a soul that nothing else has, except for them. So they think we're so cool, and they don't want anything bad to happen to us.
Yeah, we're these little guys running around.
Yeah, and we're so fragile. We're just little guys.
And especially the men, once they're dead, they're just gone.
Yeah, and the Valar have no idea what that means.
Oh my God, that would be terrifying.
That would be existentially horrifying, I think, to an eternal spirit to see another spirit just kind of vanish. And they know we go somewhere, but they don't know what happens. Yeah. So I think I really like that is what drives their errors, and not. They do kind of squabble a little bit, like Aule and Yavanna arguing about wood or whatever, but there isn't the same kind of interpersonal conflict that you would find in another pantheon, like an actual real world pantheon, because they don't have for the most part, they don't have conflicting agendas. They just love this world so much.
Yeah.
But that leads to a good question, of course, and you've hinted at it already. The fact that the very strongly Catholic Tolkien creates something that's essentially a pagan pantheon within a monotheistic world, which is wonderfully weird, because the closest equivalent to it, if we're talking straight up magisterium on the Catholic side of things, would of course be the hierarchy of the angels and the archangels, which obviously there's a parallel here, but not entirely, because Michael, Gabriel, and all that are not like the Valar. They are very distinctly different beings.
They're a different order.
Yeah, and this, Jared, you're right in that there isn't a one-to-one. They are not elemental spirits, but they are But at the same time, they kind of are. Ulmo's spirit runs through the waters of Arda, and
they
Manwë
do oversee elements.
Yeah,
but there's also some weird omissions,
right? But there is that feels. The deep-rooted, the elemental part of their being, or their overseeing of certain aspects of nature is really interesting, because that isn't a Catholic thing, at all. Not even a little bit. And I do kind of love that, he was a very sensitive nature boy. He loved his nature, and so he was like, I'm gonna put that in here. Jolly good.
Yeah.
we should also maybe talk about sort of the proto-history of the Valar in the earliest versions of the story, because the Book of Lost Tales sets up the Valar and sets up the basic arc of things. I mean, some of the language in there is essentially the same as came down in the Silmarillion and the Annual Indalia and so forth, but there are certainly differences, not least of which are the other Valar that disappear.
the Valar of War, Makar and Mease, they're like the warrior twins who are like kind of chaotic evil. They love chaos and battle, but they're part of the Valar, and Melkor isn't. And they get dropped so quickly. Right. But they are there in the earliest version. And I remember being a kid and not knowing what the Book of Lost Tales was and thinking, oh my God, bonus content, I'm going to read this. And then getting frustrated instantly by all the notes and the scholarly tone and everything. Because I was like 12. I didn't know what I was
You don't
getting
want to wade through that.
Ugh. Yeah, but I remember
I was
very
12
distinctly.
when I first read it. Jeez.
I was a very different 12-year-old.
Yeah.
From you. But yeah, getting to that part and being like, oh my God, there's extra Valar? What's going on? And it took me a shamefully long time to realize I was reading an earlier version of the story. But
dude, been there.
Yeah, but like there's no god of war in the finished pantheon. Orome sort of is, Tulkas sort of is, but they're also not quite.
Right.
So and I think that's significant that for something that is pretty influenced by like Norse and Germanic mythologies, there is no distinct god of war. There's nobody who delights in battle in the same kind of way that these twins do. Are they twins? They're twins, right?
They are. I believe they're described as twins. Yeah.
But yeah, they're kind of like the Thor or Odin kind of like they have the hall where the warriors feast and they delight in violence, and Tulkas just likes winning and Orome likes hunting, but that's not the same as warfare.
Like wrestling is like I always picture Tulkas as a wrestler.
He's just a big imbo. He's the best.
He's a sweetie.
Yeah, but there's nobody is responsible for war, just or not.
Yeah.
In this pantheon, which.
And different as well from the Greco-Roman pantheon, where we have, again, no equivalent to Ares or Mars as a result. So,
that makes complete sense to me, given that Tolkien views war as such a hideous waste.
Yeah. But they're there in the version he wrote during the war.
Yeah, when he was recovering. Yeah.
It's so... I wonder if that was just a way of processing.
Could be.
At that time when he's in it, it's like, well, of course, war is part of the powers of the world. Of course,
it's inescapable.
Yeah. And then, as you kind of work through your trauma.
Once you've gone through that.
Once you've gone through it, you're like, I don't actually think that they should be like part of the powers. If they are in any respect, it's with the guy who sucks and we don't like.
Yeah, he's the one causing the chaos, and it's up to the Valar to fix it. That brings up the their name, I believe, literally means powers. Vala is power or authority or something, so they are the powers. But the way they use that power is to rest. Maybe we use that
or
so
not,
much, or not. They mostly use it for creative acts, except for very rare occasions where they have to imprison somebody. But they don't coerce, and they can convince, but they are forbidden to coerce, dominate, influence in negative way. They can't just overwhelm you with their presence. They do it unintentionally, apparently, but which is part of why the elves agree to go. They're like, oh my God, this guy is so, oh my God, he rolled a nat 20 on charisma. It's irresistible. But they can't command the children of Eru to do anything. And coming from a god, or going, what am I trying to say? I had a weird week, you guys.
Not alone.
Yeah, these gods can't actually do a whole lot.
Yeah.
Or they refuse to do a whole lot in some ways. But there's still the powers. There's, he's always talking about power, and these are the fundamental powers.
Yeah, they can still create all this stuff, but once they create the stuff, they can't really do much about it. Like Yavanna can't do much about people cutting down trees, except have the Ents exist. That's kind of it.
In a way, they kind of run out of power, don't they? Like, Yavanna can't remake the two trees.
Right.
She's not going around introducing new species to the world all the time. She's done what she set out to do, and now she either can't or won't do it again.
And I was thinking how Manwë himself, is sort of, he's kind of, what is the word? Empty vessel is not appropriate.
He's kind of feckless, isn't he?
Well,
he's not much there, I guess is the thing. He seems to, you could argue, he holds his power lightly by knowing he has theoretically a lot, but not really using much of it. Or, sort of, I don't want to say, foisting it off as emissaries. The Eagles, remember, we did an episode on them. So, but, for somebody who can see to the end of creation and back, all throughout everywhere, and just, has, and is literally on the highest place in the world, and is able to do all that, is not dominating this world by any means. And he's again more the conduit to Eru, but
for whatever that's worth.
Yeah. It's like that scene in the Eternals. Anyway, let's say so, but or just Eternals. Anyway, but there, it's hard to put my finger on it. There's so little there to hook onto with Manwë, whereas everyone else seems to have more of a personality.
Yeah, that's true. Ulmo has a definite personality. Mandos is
Mandos is all personality. Woo.
What I love about Mandos is he is so moved when Luthien comes to sing to him because Beren is trapped in his halls because Beren died, that he lets Beren's spirit go. That's that tells you so much about character, character.
Well, I mean, yeah, but but also the fact that it's the only time.
It's the only time
that
he does it.
Ever happened and ever will happen.
And it's for this guy. Beren is not just a guy. I love
cool.
Beren is awesome. We love him. But yeah, but Manwë, what? You got a hot wife who makes the stars, which
His wife
is cool.
Is so much cooler than him.
She is so much cooler.
The elves honor her, not him.
That's true. I think that's so revealing. That she's their guy.
The sort of fecklessness of Manwë is a whole sort of part and parcel with the mistakes the Valar keep making. Or not necessarily mistakes, but decisions that we would find questionable as mortals. Like the fact that they let Melkor out of prison. What are you doing? And Nienna, my girl, is part of that decision. She's like, yeah, he's had enough. End the carceral state. Let him out. Which turns out to be a mistake.
That moment where the Valar are all just sitting around the desiccated corpses of the two trees, not doing anything. Mm-hmm. Jared, you were asking about what makes us mad. That makes me really, really mad. Is them sitting around and talking to each other in a way that the elves can't hear.
The elves can't perceive, and therefore think that the Valar are inactive.
And the Valar are like, well, we were talking, we had a meeting about this, and it's like, what? How are we supposed to know?
You didn't get the Zoom link. What's your problem?
All you had to do was just say, hold on a sec, guys, we got to talk this out. All they had to do, and they didn't.
Oh, okay. So the passage I was trying to find. This is in the Index of Nature of Middle Earth under Errors of the Valar. It goes. This is a little bit long, so hang on. If we speak last of the quote folly of Manwë and the weakness and weariness of the Valar, let us beware how we judge. In the histories, indeed, we may be amazed and grieved to read how seemingly Melkor deceived and cozened others, and how even Manwë appears at times almost a simpleton compared with him. Yeah. As if a kind but unwise father were treating a wayward child who would assuredly in time perceive the error of his ways. Whereas we, looking on and knowing the outcome, see now that Melkor knew well the error of his ways, but was fixed in them by hate and pride beyond return. He could read the mind of Manwë, for the door was open, but his own mind was false, and even if the door seemed open, there were doors of iron within closed forever. How otherwise would you have it? Should Manwë and the Valar meet secrecy with subterfuge, treachery with falsehood, lies with more lies? If Melkor would usurp their rights, should they deny his? Can hate overcome hate? Nay, Manwë was wiser, or being ever open to error heeded his will, which is more than wisdom. He was ever open because he had nothing to conceal, no thought that it was harmful for any to know, if they could comprehend it. Indeed, Melkor knew his will without questioning it, and he knew that Manwë was bound by the commands and injunctions of Eru, and would do this or abstain from that in accordance with them, always, even knowing that Melkor would break them as it suited his purpose. Thus the merciless will ever count on mercy, and the liars make use of the truth. For if mercy and truth are withheld from the fool and the lying, they have ceased to be honored. So they're so committed to being good, they don't want to betray their moral code by keeping him imprisoned.
Right.
And he's taking advantage of that, but that doesn't mean that they're fools. It means that they don't want to stoop to using his tricks against him, which Again,
I get it.
You can argue about that, but that is, I guess, what he was thinking when he was like, let's let Manwë just make weird, bad decisions.
Gosh, I mean, yeah, no. Now you put it that way, or rather, now you remind me of that. Very glad this book came out.
For real, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
So, I mean, we said it at the time, but now that we've had some time to digest it more, it's like, oh yeah, new lights on everything. So,
yeah.
But maybe something to sort of turn back on to is leaping ahead a bit here. Actually, talk about two things. Let me talk about the smaller thing first, and that is the interesting discussion in the Unfinished Tales. We discussed this briefly in episodes on Wizards, where basically they figured, hey, we need to send some folks over. Mm-hmm. And that's where Gandalf and Saruman eventually get their little commission to head off over there. And that's interesting because, to my knowledge, that's kind of the only council as such we have the Valar post the First Age. Because we don't really have it any other thing. There's one big exception of an action they do. I'll get to that, but rather they don't do. But that's kind of sense where it's sort of like there's now been enough of history in the sense of time is focused in Arda, and enough stuff has happened, and enough things have enough sorrows have occurred, but also triumphs, etc. And they were now in the Third Age, and it's now sort of like the Valar, like, what should we do?
Mm-hmm.
And they're sort of like scratching their heads, like, should we get over here? It's almost sort of like they haven't been asleep for a while. It's more sort of like, oh yeah, that's happening over there. We need to do something. And it's sort of like they're aware, but they're no longer directly doing much. It's sort of like they want to send their folks over. And to tie back into Manwë seeming not to do anything, it's telling, I think, that when it gets to a certain point, he doesn't go to attend the overthrow of Morgoth in the end. He sends his herald. It's sort of like, have the Maiar do it. Outsource.
Yeah. Delegate.
Yeah. I mean, Orome and Tolkien kind of, don't they? I think it's not.
I think
post First Age. I don't know.
I mean, for overthrowing Morgoth.
Yeah.
I think some of them are involved in that. The way they finally make up for some of their mistakes, with the Wizards, is by doing what they should have done all along, which is not isolate themselves and actually be present as guides and mentors, which is what they were supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But they were so tired and they wanted a break.
They need a little nap.
I can't condemn that decision exactly because,
it's hard fighting a war of attrition where,
long defeat.
Yeah, exactly. I get that. And especially in regards to Sauron, who is small potatoes. Of course, they're only going to send people of his caliber in terms of, or people of his sort of, you send Maiar to deal with Amaya. Yeah. It's like, that's the appropriate level of involvement here. We don't need to bust out the big guns to deal with one, he's kind of piddling. He's causing lots of problems, but...
Yeah, but especially since it's mostly humans around at that point, and they're much more fragile, so they're not going to launch another attack.
Especially, they're also a lot more spread out, I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be part of it, too. That sense of them literally walling themselves away and then walling themselves even more away is I mean that's what makes their relationship with the Numenorians so interesting, really, because it's sort of like, again, it's they don't come there directly themselves. They the elves essentially speak for them in a certain sort of way from Tol Eressëa when they come and visit, or from any other direction. And when there's, as is said in Alderaan and Erendis, we have the ceremony that is given to Eru specifically. It's interesting. They just basically the Valar, whatever. Go straight to the big guy. And even though there are the emissaries of Manwë, the Eagles, that are around just going ooh, keeping an eye on things. So we get the sense that the Valar, when they start to act towards the end of the Akalabeth, as things start to go bad, they basically do so signs and portents, more so than actions, or at least the actions are not necessarily seen to be that of the Valar. It's like, the mountain starts smoking, there's lightning strikes, people sort of die, but it doesn't seem like it's meant to be so like the Valar sort of doing something. Is more sort of actions that are just happening because the Numenorians, just are bringing it upon themselves from some higher source. It's interesting how they're not involved. And then, of course, famously, when Ar-Pharazôn and the fleet land on Valinor, the Valar basically do nothing. They said, "We give. Eru, take care of the problem." And Eru does very thoroughly.
Somewhere about that specific part, Tolkien says something like, at that point, the Númenóreans were a threat even to the Valar.
Yeah,
I believe you're right.
Which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, what does that actually mean? Can we get more about that? Like, because it's kind of a small.
It's a kind of a tossed off thing. Like, oh yeah, they were a threat. Like, they probably wouldn't have been able to actually defeat them, but they would have caused massive damage. Can you kill a Vala?
And how?
You can kill Morgoth because he's.
They didn't even kill Morgoth. They just threw him out.
Yeah.
Like, he's not dead. He's in the void somewhere.
He's
like,
just punished.
He's just no longer in Arda, and that's all. Like,
yeah. Can you? How do you defeat one of the good guys? I don't know. It would have been a very different story, but I would be curious to see that story if somebody at some point in history managed to actually defeat one of the Valar, and how that would look, and what the consequences would be.
Yeah, the only context we have for what that might even look like is when various, a couple different elves fight Morgoth and wound him.
Yeah, but even then he's in a very weakened state.
Exactly.
And he is, like, bound to one form, which the others aren't.
Exactly. So who even knows? Yeah, it's all very strange. Like, especially to go back, Jared, to what you were talking about the instinct to isolate, it does feel truly odd that the Valar were like, okay, good men, we're going to put you on an island that is closer to us than any other mortal people. But
you can't come here.
Why? Why would you even do that? That's like dangling a candy bar and going, no. It's
Look,
like, why?
But don't touch. Look, but don't touch.
Just leave them in Middle Earth? Like, why?
Yeah. It's such a bizarre decision.
Yeah. Truly weird.
I think the one thing I want to bring up, and keeping on the time, we should probably start heading towards a conclusion. So this isn't a monster episode, but it's definitely going over longer ones. Hey, we knew it would be going in. Is something we've sort of hinted at, but really is absolutely fascinating, and I know Jared's spoken about it before, is the plasticity of the Valar, that they aren't their forms. The raiment is not who they are. And digging, the more time has gone on, the more that has become very fascinating and weird to me because of all the implications. Yeah. So, I mean, among other things, I keep having to tell myself, wait, what did the Valar, the Ainur, even look like before the Children came on? If the idea, Children of Luthor, rather, if the idea was to put on forms that would please them by being like them, what were they before then? How do you determine gender? How do you determine what they did? How did they interact? What happened? It's phrased in human terms. Well, let me rephrase that. It's phrased in anthropomorphic terms by default, but that's almost sort of give us, the readers, something to hook onto.
What is, if you don't have a humanoid body, what gender are you? And we're told the gender is intrinsic to their nature. Yeah. But if Yavanna's standing around as a tree dropping golden dew on flowers or whatever she's described as doing, how is that tree gendered?
Right?
Does it matter? There's a whole host of things connected with that.
What other qualities?
What is intrinsic to them, and how is gender part of that?
Yeah, why do the Valar bother with gender other than Tolkien wanting to reinforce certain norms? Like, I guess that's the answer. That's the answer, because there is no real reason for them to have gender. Yeah,
especially since there's a long tradition in theology of angels just being genderless, like they're referred to as he, but they don't have gender. And if the Valar, I mean, in the earliest versions, the Valar do have sons and daughters, like Eonwë is the son of Manwë and Varda and all that. And I think Orome is like Yavanna's son or something. There's more like typical pantheon relationships happening. But if they can't reproduce, why do they bother with gender at all, except insofar as it relates to the children of Eru?
Exactly.
I did try to look up why he even bothered with all of this in the first place in the fantasy world, and I couldn't find any, like the Book of Lost Tales, which is the earliest version of everything. They're just there. They're already fully formed. They do change. Their conception changes over time, like especially Varda alters significantly in what she does or doesn't do. But there's no, as far as I could find, and surely this exists somewhere and I just couldn't find it, like what led him to decide to create a pantheon, decide to try to wed it to Christian theology, a specific subset of Christian theology. Why these Valar and not others? Like, why is there no specific goddess of love or something? Like, why are some things missing? Why did he arrive here? And I couldn't. There's no, as far as I know, like a diary entry or something that's like, well, I decided it would be nice to have this. And some of it you can see specific influences, like Nienna and Varda are both kind of aspects of Mary in a way. But why do we have them? Why are they there? Why? And I wish we had that, because I would love to know his actual thought process.
Yeah. I wonder if the reason we don't know is because people simply did not know much about them other than that they existed and for like a very long time. And so the questions about that part of his work probably weren't rolling in like certain other questions were. I mean, I'm sure like there's plenty of
writing him letters about like, well, what's up with... I mean, you would get, I think in the letters he talks about like Elbereth.
Yeah.
Because she comes up in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Right.
But nobody's asking...
Why would you even bother?
Nobody's asking about that. They're asking, what does she do?
Exactly. It's all taking everything as kind of, well, yes, of course you would have this because you wanted them. But no one is going like, well, why did you want this? Why is this the shape of the world? Which is, kind of a bummer. Because it was a thing, actually, I did not think about that question until you started asking it. And I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, what is that about, man?
And we have origin stories for some of the other stuff, like Numenor. He wanted an Atlantis story.
Yeah.
So some of it we know he was specifically remixing things, like the Children of Húrin and all that is Kullervo. But what's with the Valar? Yeah.
The Valar.
What are they doing?
What are they up to?
Nobody knows.
Maybe that's where we can end for this time. Yeah. Unless there's a last little final word, Jared, you want to do just sort of wrap up discussion for now, or
I think we covered it. The only thing I could think of to actually talk about more was the sub-creative aspect, but that might just be a whole thing on its own.
Might be. We'll see about that.
Save that for later. Valar Part 2.
Yes.
Okay, so the choice of topic has come back around to me. Here we go. Well, looking ahead, our next episode will be our 3rd anniversary. It's strange to say. We've been around that long. And so it's time to do something fun. So, at least I like to think so. For our 1st anniversary, we did the Silver Call duology by McKiernan. Remember?
Oh, my God.
What's coming?
And last time we did the Rankin Bass Hobbit, and all that. And we have, after all, cracked the seal on adaptations more thoroughly. We did, of course, Fellowship of the Ring in this past December, and we've got other things coming up. I think it's about time. The Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings. Here we go.
Shit.
That's what we're doing for next episode.
Man.
The other big one from the 70s.
Okay.
Here we go.
We had to do it at some point, folks. It had to happen.
Had to do it to him.
Now is time.
Next episode is 90% yelling about Sam.
Oh, yep.
There will be that. So it's there's a lot going on. There's a lot there. We certainly have the advantage that Ralph's still with us and still has opinions and is very active on Twitter. You can see a lot of his art. He's always sharing out sales from that and his other work and everything like that. So who knows? Maybe you'll hear this. Maybe you'll have things to say. I have no idea.
We approach him with questions.
No. This will just be us. But that is what we will look at next time. So gear up. It is very easily found online one way or another. I'm sure it's streaming like other things. I know it's become out on both DVD and Blu-ray. The point is it's out there. It's about 2.5 hours long. It just take an afternoon off if you haven't seen it and see it, and then you'll be scratching your chin a lot and going, okay. But we'll have more to say at that next time. So anyway, we got a little prep up there for y'all. Okay, so that's about it. So unless there's any last other things, I guess we'll wrap it up. Oh, a lot to talk about. And I don't think Amazon's going to drop anything new on us for a while yet. So I think we can sort
of say that.
Oh no, you jinxed it.
Or am I wrong? We'll find out. By the time this episode drops, there'll be something else in or be outdated all over again. No. But otherwise, thank you all again very much for listening. We do appreciate it. As we said at the start of the episode, really welcome all the comments we've been been getting. Always happy to hear more. Deeply appreciated very much. And we look forward to coming back to you next time with that and whatever else we may be talking about then. So until then, we'll see you. Thanks again for listening to this episode of By the Bywater. Please subscribe and rate us via your favorite podcast listening options.
Episodes and show notes are at megaphonic.fm/bythebywater, all one word. You can also message us through here. Email us at bythebywater@megaphonic.fm or follow us on Twitter at By-The-Bywater.
You can also follow us individually on Twitter and ask questions there. I'm at Vandroid Helsing.
I'm at Schwinter, SCHWINDTER.
And I'm Ned Raggett, 2 G's, 2 T's. By the Bywater is a proud member of Megaphonic Podcast Network. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. We hope you join us again next time. Until then, Namarie.